Hello, LXD fam. Welcome to our second Meet the Author podcast. This is Krishna, your host for the day, and you must be knowing me already. If not, I am the community co founder. In today's podcast, I am pleased to present the author of the book, Beginner's Guide to Instructional Design, none other than Purnima Valiathan, who has 25 years of expertise in both teaching and training. As an instructional designer, Purnima has worked on various projects that involved in the application of instruction design, technological, and media to address the learning needs of both student learner and adult learner. Hello, Purnima. We're happy that you have joined us on the LXD Guild podcast. Would you share your journey of becoming an instruction designer?
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Yes, let me share my story, I would say, of becoming an instructional designer because indeed there's a story out there.
Great.
I joined as an instructional designer with NIIT in the year 1993. I remember the year very well because that's the year my son was born. And I actually was a teacher teaching political science to 11th and 12th students, and I happened to see an advertisement in the paper asking for, people with a teaching background. And what actually caught my attention was the fact that the advertisement also stated that computer knowledge is desirable and not mandatory on a computer at that time ever. So I just applied for a lark, and then just within a month's time, I found myself, becoming an instructional designer with NIIT. And when I joined, honestly, I had no idea what my job was going to involve. But I wasn't the only one. I think everybody who was appointed at that time had no clue. So we were all blindfolded. Let me use that term when we joined this company. So that's the story. And I wondered whether I would be able to survive, and how long I'll be able to survive. But interestingly, um, I guess this was my calling, and destiny was kind, and I could do what I enjoyed doing, and I continue to do that today too.
Great to hear that, Purnima. First of all, thank you very much for authoring such a wonderful book, Beginner's Guide to Instructional Design. I'm so impressed with the way you structured the curriculum and its design. I would like to understand what motivated you to create a beginner's guide specifically for instructional design.
Okay, so I there are many factors that got me to write this book. First of all, the fact that at least in India, most instructional designers, a good percentage, are accidental IDs, and a lot of them are generalists. They are not specifically trained in instructional design when they take up the job. As a result of that, during my initial career, I felt that I had an edge over the other accidental instructional designers. And I realized when I reflected that the edge was because of my professional training in education, my bachelor's degree in education and master's degree in education. I understood learning science. That gave me an edge over the rest, who were either engineers or, maybe degree in mass communication, or generally having a humanities degree or even a science degree and had joined. So I kind of reflected on that, and I realized that instructional designers who learn on the job are adept at the how, how to write a storyboard, how to design something. But what they lack is an understanding of the why. That is where learning science comes in. Okay. So I was looking at bridging that gap, and it is very important to bridge that gap because Instructional design, as you would agree, and I'm sure a lot of others would agree, is a very subjective domain. You can teach this way and you can teach that way. Okay. So when you are designing material for a customer, and the customer is, having a discussion with you and asking you to change something, and understanding of learning science is what helps. It helped me. I realized that whatever projects that I had worked on, if a customer, asked me to change something, I was able to give a very valid reason or a rationale for having done it the way I had done it. And I would say 98% of the time, I was able to convince the customer. And with other instructional designers, I realized it was a trial and error. They would reach there by, changing, fixing, discussion, just the cycle time for approval would be more. So that's the second thing. I realize that it's very important for instructional designers to understand learning science, along with knowing frameworks and applying frameworks, maybe applying a Ganier's events of instruction or applying a Bloom's taxonomy. Why did these people come up with these theories or frameworks, and how relevant is it to, training or learning design? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that theory? See, most of these theories are man-made theories, right? A human being has come up with that theory. So Benjamin Bloom has come up with Bloom's taxonomy. Ganier has come up with Ganier's events of instruction. Right. Now, why did they come up with that? Number one. And two, it's not cast in stone. If Bloom's taxonomy has strengths, there are also some inherent weaknesses in the taxonomy. So, looking at a theory, holistically is very important. Right. So, that's the second reason. The third reason was that there was no book on instructional design, at least by an Indian author. And I realized that, people who join struggle to learn. And in the workplace, the focus is always on project completion, deadlines, and that's how it is. And that's how it will always be. So even if there is a senior who has learned, ID on the job and is almost an expert at it, he or she may not find the time to mentor and guide a newcomer, in a way that a newcomer needs to be mentored and guided, just because of the paucity of time and, these project deadlines, that will really be a hurdle for them. And so that's the third reason I decided to write this book. And finally, the last reason was that, there are books written by foreign authors which are partly applicable in the Indian context. In the Indian context, to use a term which I think one of my colleague once said, we are like the back room or the back end of ID, because a lot of work that we get comes from the US or Europe, UK, maybe Asia Pacific, right? So here we are sitting and actually working in the back end. And our challenges are very unique. They are not very similar to the challenges that a person in the US may face or the person in Europe may face, right? So this was very customized to the job of an instructional designer in the Indian context. So, yes, these were the four reasons that motivated me to write this book.
That's great, Purnima. In fact, I can relate myself, with whatever you just said, everything, because I was even today I can call myself as an accidental instructional designer. I struggled a lot, in the initial stages where, because of the lack of, the books or the sources that we have from the Indian authors, and we are glad we have one book from Indian author. So I would like to check, for those starting out, like me, I mean, for those starting out in instruction design, What advice or guidance do you offer in your book to help them progress in the careers?
Okay, so I think what I have done in the book is I have tried to keep the book as close to the tasks that an instructional designer will perform in the workplace. You know, so while I have addressed a lot of theory and learning science, these are dovetailed to the tasks. So if you have read the book and anybody else listening to this podcast has read the book, they will know that the book is designed to follow the ADDIE methodology. So I address analysis, I address design, and within design, I address learning outcomes, instructional approach, learner engagement, and then development. I address storyboards, and what are the frameworks that will help you write a storyboard well. Then implementation, how to conduct VILT sessions, the challenges faced in a VILT session, and how is online self-paced learning different from classroom learning in the implementation part. And finally evaluation, what makes a good evaluation of learning material. So one is that when you try to connect theory with the tasks you perform in the workplace, that's when learning becomes effective, and you are able to relate with the theory or the learning science, right? And the other guidance in the book, I would say, is that I have spoken about how there are variables in ID, and the variables are the audience, the learning outcome, and the content. So, as the term suggests, variables will vary from project to project, right? But at the same time, there are constants. And what are the constants? The constants are, how do we learn? Okay. How do children learn? How do adults learn? And what motivates learners? Why would a learner learn? Why would a child learn, or why would an adult learn? So these, I have said, are the constants. So an understanding of the constant gives you a foundation, and you should be able to set these learning principles or theories, or use a theory or principle depending on the context, which is the variables. So I always advise any new instructional designer to really, even if you're just storyboarding and you're a new instructional designer, focus a lot on the output of the analysis, which is, who is my audience? What are the challenges they face? How can I make the content engaging for this particular audience? And what is the outcome of the learning, right? What are we expecting them to do? So whether you are a senior instructional designer or a junior one who's storyboarding, understanding the context or the variables is what will help you customize the content to suit that particular context. So my advice is always that in instructional design or learning experience design, context is everything. So understand the context.
That's great. Even when I read that book, now you talk about the constant and variables, and I really like the way that you portrayed analysis is, which is variable and constant things are from design, development to design, and design development, and all these things. Are there any multimedia elements such as online resources or supplementary materials that accompany your book for a more immersive learning journey?
Absolutely. So we have our portal,
Mhm.
www.purnima-valiathan.com. While there are, it's actually a learning management system with a lot of structured courses, but we also have a lot of free resources that actually complement the book. I would urge the viewers of this podcast, or the ones who are hearing the podcast, to specifically explore the blog section, which you'll find at the foot of the homepage. And there's a section called ID Toolkit. Okay. So the blog section is there are articles that I write, off and on a relevant topic, like maybe how do you design instructional visuals? What points to keep in mind while visualizing for learning material, or how job aids are very important for workplace learning professionals, and how do you identify and demarcate what needs to be learned and what needs to be referred to. So these are some of the articles that I have written in the blog section, available for free to anybody who wishes to go through it. And the ID Toolkit section actually has a lot of checklists that can be downloaded and kept and saved by instructional designers. Lately, we have started a YouTube channel called the Indian ID, and we have currently released 2 episodes of the channel. And the first 2 episodes are actually setting the context of what does an instructional designer do. Like, a lot of us struggle to explain to people what what does an ID do, right? I mean, I struggled 25 years back, I still struggle now, because people always ask the question, you don't know the subject, so how do you design learning material on that subject? That's a question I get very often. So we have this YouTube channel, and going forward in this YouTube channel, we'll be addressing a lot of very practical tasks that IDs perform, and best practices for completing these tasks. So these are a lot of other resources that anybody who's purchased the book can access whenever they feel that they need some guidance in a certain area.
Thank you very much, Purnima. Once again, that we are very happy that we have an Indian author in instructional designing, which we were lacking of, from last 6 to 8 years. Uh, Purnima, would you like to address our LXD guilders and convey a message regarding the book and how it can be beneficial for our aspirant instructional designers?
So, as I said, in as my answer to the first question of, I think the second question, not the first one, of why I wrote this book, um, I said one of the reasons was the unique, situation of the Indian instructional designer. And so let me just elaborate a little bit on that. And again, this is coming from my own experience, because in my career spanning 25 plus years, I have worked on, projects for corporate training. I have worked on projects for K-12. I have worked on projects for vocational skills training. And I've also worked on projects, for special needs. Basically, I designed an English language curriculum for the hearing impaired. Right. So, in all these projects, ID was applicable. Right, whether it was for corporate training, whether it was for vocational skills, and whether it's for higher education. By the way, I also designed courses for a university, and that comes under higher education, or whether it was for special needs. But the fact was that the ID principles varied from one project to another. And I have noticed that IDs, when they complete a project and when they are faced with a new project, and if it's for a different domain, like it's not corporate training, but for higher ed, they they start their learning curve all over again, because they now have to learn. Because see, as I said, ID is about context, the variables, the audience, the learning outcome, and the content, right? So higher education, your audience is different. Here is an audience who you are getting ready, getting work ready, job ready, right? And they are neither small kids nor are they working professionals, so they are somewhere in between. So adult learning principles doesn't completely apply. Principles that guide learning of school students don't apply, right? So you have to understand what works for them, right? So every ID would start the learning curve all over again. Okay. And I felt that having a book that addresses all the domains, and what theories are applicable in which section, for example, Piaget's theory of cognitive development is should be understood by instructional designers working to design material for K-12 learners. Adult learning principles are great for workplace or corporate training, um, so similarly, there are principles and theories that we need to understand that help or guide us to design the learning material effectively for that particular target audience. So I was hoping that this book will help instructional designers to quickly adapt to the needs of a new project for a new area, right? And the second thing is, I have used a lot of practical examples throughout the book. So the book is not theory, but it's a connect between theory and practice. And if you are suddenly in the middle of work and you are wanting to look up something specific, um, you can just open the book to the page that you want, because the book is also designed to follow the ADDIE methodology. So if you're writing a storyboard, you know which chapter to look up, and get to see examples. And as we know as instructional designers, that worked examples are an excellent way of teaching, so I've tried to walk the talk. Being an instructional designer, when I wrote the book, I ensured that from an ID perspective, my book is there. It follows the principles of instructional design. I actually practice what I teach. So that's our tagline also, ID mentors, we practice what we teach, you know. So yeah, so on that note, I would say that the book will definitely help you. And yes, there's a lot of stuff online. You can Google. Now you've got artificial intelligence tools, you've got Chat GPT, you can ask a question, right? But yes, a machine is a machine at the end of the day. And this book has been written by a human being who's lived and experienced instructional design. And I've tried to share all my experience through the book. So, yes, definitely the book will help, the IT community in a big way, I must say.
That's great. Uh, and my eagerness towards the book increased a lot now because I just started and I had to end that reading. And Gilesh, please don't miss out reading that book. And yeah, that is for today's Gilesh. Don't forget to like and hit the bell icon to subscribe so that you don't miss interesting videos. Meet you in our next podcast. Until then, happy learning.